Our second scripture lesson is from John's Gospel. It is the night of Jesus' betrayal. He is in the upper room with his disciples. It is after the supper has been served. He's talking with them, and he says, as John records it, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing, but I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you. And I appointed you to go and bear fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. I'm giving you these commands so that you may love one another." This is the word of the Lord. Jesus says, "Do this in remembrance of me," as he serves the bread and cup, as Paul tells us, the words of institution for the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. And I want to share with you some of my thoughts about the doing, about the remembrance for serving communion, and how Jesus' words about friendship tie it all together, at least for me, as to what it means to be at this table. Now, in a little over 40 years of serving communion in 12 different churches, each church has been different. Differences in communion ware, the size of the table, the placement of the table, some up on a chancel, some down on the floor, how everything is placed on the table, how the congregation is served, some always by intinction, I was in one church that served by intinction. It was one service each morning that they had, but the communion was served by intinction. And there was a station for grape juice and for wine, for gluten-free bread, for regular bread that the ministers or elders would pull off and give you a chunk of bread for intinction, and then also taken in trays out to the congregation. It was a full-service communion. And when I've asked about it, whenever I go, I always ask, how do we do this here? And they look at me, and usually it's a member of the worship committee, they look at me rather strangely and say, "Well, we do it the Presbyterian way." I think that says a whole lot more about us being Presbyterian. And as an interim, I'm very aware of the different customs that each church has, and I try to, especially the first one or two times, and even into doing services, how communion is served. For the most part, as I say, some served by intinction. For the most part, it's been served where the ministers, or just myself, stand behind the table, the elders come up, and we serve. Sometimes the bread and drink go out together, sometimes separately, as is done here. But there was one where I would go to the top of the steps and kind of step down and give the trays to the elders. And I remember my first communion at that particular church. I'd been several years in a church where I stood behind the table, the elders came up. So what happens that very first Sunday, I'm standing behind the table, the elders start up, but they stop at the steps. And I'm waiting. And they're waiting. And finally, I get the idea, because there's this look on their face, somebody honked the horn so this old man will move behind the green light. Of course, I think about, what if I forget to say the right words? What if I drop the bread? I remember one time the loaf of bread was still frozen and you couldn't break it. What if I mishandle the tray of drinks in passing it to an elder? In my 40 years of serving communion, no, I've never dropped and I have spilt grape juice out on the white tablecloth, and God forbid messing with the Chancel Guild after that happens. But I've never dropped a full. I had one elder in all 40 years, one elder who was serving, I can remember it so clearly, he dropped the full tray of drinks on this lady's dress. He was a curmudgeon. And he was proud of being a curmudgeon about doing things right. So I thought that was just God's sense of humor on his behalf. Now, my thoughts do turn to things like that, but those are the logistics of communion. We get so caught up in the doing that we forget or neglect the one who it is who told us to do what we're doing. It's not about the logistics. It's about the love. That's what we're really doing when we do this in remembrance of him. In our reading from John's Gospel, Jesus is at the table with his disciples the night of the Last Supper. John tells us that Jesus has washed the disciples' feet. He's served the bread, poured the wine. Judas has gone out for his betrayal. And then Jesus has this extended commentary where he's speaking to his disciples. And he says to those who are still with him, I chose you. You did not choose me. I think it's important to hear what he's not saying. He doesn't say, I've got a dress code and a worship code and a doctrine code and a music code and a prayer code and a building code and a certain kind of people code for you to follow if you want to be my friends. This table is where we hear the call of Jesus and share the friendship of Jesus Christ. Carole King said it best, I think, in her song about being a friend. You've got a friend. All you have to do is call, and I'll be there. And I think about that because it has a lot to do with why I'm Presbyterian. My grandmother Lancaster grew up out in the country in Louisiana. It belonged to a certain church of a certain denomination, not Presbyterian. And when she got married, this was back in the early 1920s, she moved to town with my grandfather. The ladies of the town church and the denomination to which she had grown up would not visit her because her new husband, her grandfather, had horror of horrors, heresies of heresies, once owned a pool hall. The Presbyterian women, however, did visit. They made a visit they didn't have to make to someone who wasn't expecting it, but who was very glad to receive it. Those ladies were friends of Jesus. And I'm Presbyterian because my grandmother experienced the grace and acceptance of friendship of Jesus through them. A mysterious joy of having people show they love you even when you see yourself as unlovable or unwelcome. Friends do that for you, don't they? They love you no matter what. Maybe you remember Bruno Mars' song, Count on Me. If you ever find yourself stuck in the middle of the sea, I'll sail the world to find you. If you ever find yourself lost in the dark and you cannot see, I'll be the light to guide you. Find out what we're made of when we are called to help our friends in need. That's what's at stake for you and me as we come to this table and do what we do. Now let me be clear. It's easy to get distracted by the logistics of communion or to conveniently forget the where and how and context of all that was going on that night of Jesus' betrayal when these words were given and get caught up in the sweet invitation to be Jesus' friends. Now, growing up in the South, I was taught that everything goes better with sweet tea. And that's how we often think about our friendship with Jesus. We romanticize the part of communion that talks about broken bodies and poured blood, and we escape the struggle of what it means to live the life Jesus calls us to be as his friends. We sweeten the tough ideas that will cost us something if we live by them. We think all Jesus has to do in our friendship together is set the table for Sunday dinner and then we can go take a nap. But when Jesus calls us his friends, he looks for us to live as his friends, as obediently and sacrificially serving the world from this table. We share his love, and then we serve his love. That's the remembrance part. Perhaps it would help us to think that when Jesus calls us friends, he's calling us to a friendship that's deeper than anything we know in this world of superficial friendships that have no responsibilities or no commitments. Henry Nouwen described this call to Christian friendship prophetically, I think, because he wrote this in 1975. He said, "Our society seems to be increasingly hard and full of fearful, defensive, aggressive people, anxiously clinging to their property and inclined to look at their surrounding world with suspicion, always expecting an enemy to suddenly appear, intrude, and do harm." Look around us. The conflicts between majority and minority groups, the identity tribes based on ethnicity or race, sexual orientation or gender, economic class or lifestyle, political or religious or moral passions, all of it creating an intensified separation one from the other. Barriers built, doors slammed, cold shoulders, what it feels like to be in middle school or high school, to bring your lunch tray to a table and the other students sitting there make it very clear you need to find another place to eat. When I serve communion, I think about what would happen if I saw my own worst enemy coming down the aisle to sit next to where I am. Think about that. What if your worst enemy came and sat by you as the bread and drink were being served? What would it take for you and me to turn and say, "Take, eat, take, drink, for this is from the table of our friend Jesus"? This table ties us to the life and death of Jesus by service and sacrifice to love one another. Do this in remembrance of me. The logistics of love, if you will. We are to share and serve the love of Jesus Christ with all kinds of people chosen by Jesus, not by us. I believe this table is the heart and soul of every table in our lives, every place where we are in one way or another in fellowship, in communion with, connected to other people in all sorts of circumstances. So I want you to picture and remember tables in your lives. Kitchen tables, formal dining tables, picnic tables, coffee tables, office tables, school lunch tables, all sorts of tables. Sitting with strangers, sitting with loved ones. And can you remember those tables where you were being served and filled and loved? I remember a table in my own life. From the time I was 13 till I was 18, all the Lancaster aunts and uncles, 6 children in all, one never got married, one got married somewhere in those 5 years. All the cousins, as they came and we all lived within 30 miles of my grandparent Lancaster's family home. So we would gather on the second Sunday of each month at the Lancaster home, my grandmother and my grandfather, for Sunday dinner. Adults and older cousins were sitting in the dining room, the children in the kitchen at the yellow formica-topped table. I had been allowed to move out of the kitchen. We did this even before everybody lived nearby. Just whoever was there could come to dinner. So it was forever that I grew up doing this. I was the oldest grandchild. And when I got to be 12, I moved out of the kitchen to the adult table, a Southern-style bar mitzvah. My grandmother went back and forth from the kitchen to the tables, making sure everybody got enough. And it was just like church. We all had our place to sit. And even though some at that table, the one over here, an aunt, and this aunt over here, and then because of that, they didn't like each other. And I know that's hard for you to understand in a family. It was more than they didn't like each other. They were at odds every other day of the month, except that one time on Sunday. For that, at that moment, at that place, with all those people, they were served by someone who loved us all, my grandmother, a true friend of Jesus Christ. And every time I step behind the table, my thoughts go to that other table where my grandmother's human hospitality revealed a divine hospitality, where there's a place for everybody and everyone gets enough. My deepest heartfelt thoughts as I step behind this table to serve communion turn to all who would come to this table, and just being at the table myself, joyful, contemplative, heartfelt, humbled, expectant thoughts of being here to share in the mystery of God's hospitality as friends of Jesus, who calls us, invites us to come to his table, eat with him, learn from him, to love as he has loved us. To God be the glory.